I say, Grandpuff, what's going on here?
This lady and gentleman will be chartering a train for their wedding in a few weeks.
They're deciding if they'd like me as their something new, or Duke as their something old. You know, for that good luck thing.
You could have Atlas here as both. He worked with us on the Mid-Sodor Railway decades ago, but only arrived here a few months ago.
Both bride and groom blinked, then started discussing it amongst themselves.
Are you all right, Atlas?
Something new? If I may ask, Ivo Hugh, when were you built?
Oh, back in 1996. I'm only 16 years old. Just a wee lad, as Donald and Douglas call me.
But, Grandpuff, I thought Stuart told me you came here in 1969.
That's correct.
Then how come you're number 8 and Ivo's number 7? Shouldn't it be the other way around?
I did ask about that, but I was told to wait until I was a bit older.
That was a few years ago, as I recall.
So you can tell me now, then.
I'm afraid not, Ivo. I wasn't here for it myself.
You weren't?
No. All I really know is that Adeline had her accident a few months before I was found.
Before Ivo could reply, the wedding couple returned with the thin controller.
Duke, you'll be taking the wedding train.
So it's something old then. I will be happy to help.
Thank you. We appreciate it, replied the groom. As the couple and thin controller walked off, Ivo Hugh shot Duke a curious look.
I'll talk to the others and ask them to tell you in the sheds tonight.
Thank you.
With that, Atlas and Ivo Hugh left to continue their work. It goes without saying that Duke was as good as his word. He spoke to the other engines when he saw them during the day. Some were a bit hesitant to discuss it. Others were fiercely in favour of the idea. That evening, the engines returned to the sheds after their day's work. Ivo Hugh looked around as he stopped.
Dinna go looking at me. I wasn't here when Adeline died.
Duncan!
That is what happened, isn't it? Dinna call it passing away.
Died? But we engines don't age.
Ivo Hugh broke off. He'd heard tales from the big engines about scrapping.
Adeline wasn't scrapped, if that's what you're thinking.
Then what did happen?
It would be best if we start at the beginning. Now, have you noticed that gate at the end of the slate quarry?
Yes. I don't think I've ever been through it.
There's a reason for that, Ivo. That rear part of the quarry hasn't belonged to our railway since the early 1960s.
It was sold to the Ministry of Defence. From that, our railway got the money to build the Lakeside Loop.
That's cool, but why would the Ministry of Defence want part of an old slate quarry?
We don't know. They didn't tell us, and still won't.
But Volker, surely you took trains up there?
Yes and no. Our orders were always to leave the trucks just outside the gate. We couldn't go any further anyway. We'd then back off and wait. After a while we'd be clear to collect a different set of trucks, which we'd then take back.
We had to be careful with the loaded trucks too. They usually had a danger sign on the side of them.
Why? What was in them?
Nobody told us, but it must have been munitions.
We can't say that for sure, Sir Handel.
Yes, but surely you must suspect that too. Some of it was even delivered in those special metal containers. They were incredibly heavy, as I recall.
Well, if they were munitions, they should have told us. Just a bunch of needless fuss and messing about, if you ask me.
We didn't ask you.
But Duncan's right. It was a bit of a fuss. That's why the thin controller brought Adeline just after the loop line opened. She'd worked at an army depot before coming here and had the right clearance to go work at the MOD quarry. She took over most of those trades. With her security clearance, she could go straight into their part of the quarry.
We were glad to have her too.
Speak for yourself. There was all that fuss over special fuel too.
She may have burned oil instead of coal, Duncan, but it wasn't a bother. The army people were keen on having an engine that didn't emit sparks. Besides, having her here did free us up to look after our passengers and visitors. She did help with those too.
I suppose you've got a point.
So what happened?
Well, the Ministry of Defense stopped using that quarry in 1993. At least, that's when the trains to it stopped.
No, I mean, what happened to Adeline? Duke said she had her accident before she came here, and Duncan said she died.
The engines exchanged uncomfortable looks.
To be honest, we still don't exactly know what happened.
Because of the secrecy.
That, and because we each only saw parts of it. But we'll tell you what we do know.
Silence fell over the sheds for a moment, and the engines who'd been there in 1968 thought back to those strange few days. One spring morning that year, Rheneas had been taking a passenger train. He was covering for Duncan, who was on loan to the Tally-Flynn Railway. "Stop!" Rheneas did so as the station master ran up, waving a red flag.
"I'm afraid you'll have to wait, Rheneas. We've got another train coming back from the loop."
Another train?
There weren't any other trains scheduled. A whistle sounded out. Rheneas couldn't believe his eyes as Adeline came steaming around the bend. She was moving quite quickly, with one of the MOD trains in tow.
Are you alright, Adeline?
I am, thank you, Rheneas. Just a little delay up at the quarry.
She was gone before Rheneas could reply. As he got his train moving, Rheneas found himself wondering what had happened. He'd taken his share of MOD trains before Adeline had arrived. In all those years, he'd never known them to have any delays up there. A couple of hours later, Peter Sam was taking a MOD train up to the quarry. Owing to the earlier delay, Adeline hadn't been available to look after it. As usual, he shunted it by the quarry gate, then moved off to wait. Usually, this only took about 10 minutes or so. But this time, the wait seemed to drag on.
Driver, how long have we been waiting here?
Just on half an hour.
What? Half an hour? Have you had a call from the soldiers? We left their trucks there half an hour ago. Shouldn't they have called by now?
I'll check. The workmen did so, and returned a few moments later. I've spoken to the officer in charge up there. They won't need you to take the empty trucks back.
They won't?
No. Colonel Westbrook was quite firm on that.
Well, if he says so.
Peter Sam replied, and he headed off. He knew better than to ask further. They wouldn't get any more out of the military people at the quarry. A couple of hours later, Adeline caught up with Peter Sam at the sheds. She asked him if he'd seen anything unusual at the quarry. He wanted to say something useful, but had to answer no. Over the next few days, further delays occurred at the MOD quarry. Adeline was held back a few times, and the others had to cover some of her trains. They wanted to help, but Adeline's buffers were tied. They did what they could, of course, and kept an eye out for anything unusual, but they didn't spot anything. One evening, Adeline returned to the sheds after a hard day's work. She'd been out late again, the result of yet another delay.
Excuse me, friends. May I have your attention for a moment?
The conversation died down, and all eyes turned to Adeline.
I've got a message from Colonel Westbrook up at the quarry. He's aware that you've been keeping an eye out and sent his thanks.
We're happy to help, if we can.
It may be needed, Skarloey. I've been cleared to tell you some details, but these must remain confidential.
What sort of details? What's actually going on up there?
It appears that these delays and incidents may be the results of sabotage.
What? Sabotage?
Unfortunately, yes. There are those who would like to see the MOD and Her Majesty's government embarrassed or worse. Colonel Westbrook, Corporal Harris and I have come up with a plan, but we will need your help to deal with this spectre of trouble.
What help do you need from us?
Over the next few days, I may ask some of you to perform certain tasks. All I ask is that you carry them out without asking too many questions. Mr. Sam has already approved this.
All right, we'll do what we can.
Thank you.
As the engines tried to get to sleep, they couldn't help worrying. Sir Handel was especially concerned. He'd been involved in a military investigation before. He had been pulling MOD wagons when he'd had his accident with George the Steamroller. He'd later learned they were empty, a circumstance which Colonel Westbrook had described as fortunate. The Colonel had questioned Sir Handel thoroughly before finally accepting that it was an accident. Afterwards, Sir Handel had taken some solace in the fact that George would have had a similar interrogation, but all the same, Sir Handel would rather not repeat that experience.
I hope this gets sorted soon.
I think we all do, Sir Handel.
For most of the next day, the engines went about their business, yet they couldn't help worrying. They spotted Colonel Westbrook around the railway a few times. He made no attempt to talk to them, nor they him, but they could tell that he was watching, observing, looking for something. That evening, Rheneas was bringing a goods train down the line. As he stopped, he spotted Adeline and the Colonel talking.
Allow this spectre of sabotage to run amok. There's already been enough damage.
Agreed. I've received some equipment from London, and the plan...
The Colonel broke off as he spotted Rheneas.
Sorry for interrupting, sir. I'll be on my way soon.
I see. Can you please not mention what you've heard here?
Of course, sir.
Rheneas replied, although he wasn't sure what was so secret about 1.5 sentences. The next day dawned. It was the 22nd of August, 1968, a Thursday. A date the Scarloy Railway engines would soon have cause to remember. While Peter Sam was collecting some trucks, Adeline stopped nearby.
Peter Sam, I need your help. Do you see those 2 MLD wagons over there?
Those on the interchange track?
Yes. I'll need you to leave them in the siding at Krosno-Kurin. They are empty, but could you and the others please keep an eye on them?
Of course.
Peter Sam took the trucks to Krosno-Kurin and left them behind as requested. They sat there for a while, alone and mostly untouched, but when Rusty passed, just over an hour later, only 1 truck stood in the siding. He took note of it and reported it to Adeline when he met her further up the track. She was heading back down and quickly made her way to Krosno-Kurin. At the station, she took the loop and waited for Scarloy to pass with a passenger train. As she stopped, she noticed that both trucks stood in the siding.
Scarloy, do you know if anyone's been shunting those 2 trucks?
Not that I'm aware of. Everyone's out except for Rheneas. He's having his injectors seen too.
I see. Thank you, Scarloy.
With that, Adeline departed. She couldn't help worrying. Later that afternoon, heavy rain had rolled in. Rheneas, his injectors repaired, had brought a train up to Scarloy station. Adeline was up at the quarry and was due to head down after Rheneas had left. The guard's whistle sounded out and he moved off.
Sorry, Rheneas.
What? Driver! She didn't have a crew in her cab! Adeline is a runaway!
The station master dashed into his office and raised the alarm. Rheneas watched down the line, worried.
That sounded like a crash!
Crash? That was an explosion, Rheneas. Bigger than a hand grenade too. Haven't heard one like that since the war.
They listened carefully, but all they heard was rain. After a few minutes, the station master walked up. I've just spoken to my counterpart at Rheneas station. Adeline hasn't passed there yet.
She should have by now. I mean, at that speed.
Indeed. Sir Handel's on his way up. He's being held there.
So I'm to head down then? It sounds like Adeline's in trouble.
That's correct. You're to leave your coaches here. Controller's orders. Leaving his train behind, Rheneas headed down towards the station that shared his name. Yet as he headed along the line, he found nothing. No trucks, no signs of a derailment, no signs of Adeline.
Did Adeline go past you?
No. Did you see her?
No, not a sign.
What? Well, she can't have been sent around the loop again. The tracks aren't set up that way. You're telling me she's vanished?
Sir Handel, we had an explosion.
It sounded like it was on the old iron bridge.
Before Sir Handel could reply, the station master joined them. Rheneas and Sir Handel, I've just had a call from the Thin Controller. You both need to report to Craven's Gate immediately. A bus has been arranged to take your passengers on. Sir Handel and Rheneas were coupled back to back and ran around to the other end of the train. Once all of their passengers had gotten out, they headed off. Neither engine spoke until they reached Croven's gate. They stopped next to the other engines, all of whom were looking worried.
Oh, I'm glad to see you're okay. We heard there was an accident.
It was Adeline.
What? Where is she? Is she alright?
We don't know, Stuart.
Perhaps I should explain.
Said the thin controller. He sighed.
While assisting with the investigation into sabotage at the quarry, Adeline became a runaway with some MOD trucks. She derailed on the old iron bridge and fell into the gorge below.
Is it possible to rescue her, sir?
I'm afraid not, Rusty.
Boiler sludge! She's one of us, sir. There must be something you can do.
I'm sorry. Even if she did survive the fall, we don't have the equipment that could reach her down there. Especially not with the rain runoff. It's too deep for recovery. It would be risking the lives of our workmen to try.
But sir, that's the most...
Falcon! We all feel the same as you do, but try and show some decorum. This sort of behaviour would never suit His Grace.
Sir Handel fell silent. The next morning, the engines were still coming to terms with the news. Barely a word was spoken as they went about their duties. Around morning tea time, Skarloey and Sir Handel were taking on coal and water.
Just between you and me, Skarloey, I don't buy it.
Don't buy what?
What's the thing controller said last night? We both know Adeline, and he does too. Running away like that, it's something she would never do.
But Renee saw it last night.
There's something else he saw, well, heard last night.
Sir Handel said, and he told Skarloey about the explosion.
An explosion? Are you sure, Sir Handel?
That's what he and his driver said, yes.
That does put a different spin on things. But the MOD won't tell us much.
Yes, I know what they're like. Do you think that's why the thing controller didn't want to rescue her? I mean, that's not like him either. He didn't say anything about an explosion.
You may have something there,
Skarloey replied. Sir Handel left to collect his trucks, lost in thought.
So, what did happen?
We did check that bridge. The next morning. Every inch of it. All the tracks were just as we left it.
You know as much as we do now.
Oh, so you didn't use the number 7 for Duke?
They found and restored me a few months later. At the time, I was told they'd recently lost their number 7, and it was too soon to reuse the number. I now understand why.
When you were being built, Ivo, the thing controller did ask us about reusing Adeline's number. We felt by then that enough time had passed.
Oh, well, in that case, I hope I live up to it.
You've nothing to worry about, Ivo. You work just as hard as she did.
Thank you for telling me. At least now I know.
So do I.
Good evening, sir. Are you working late again?
Yes, and I overheard your story. I must admit this is the first time I've heard all of it.
Let me guess. Your father was sworn to secrecy about the whole thing?
Essentially, yes. Now, the Ministry of Defence approached me last year about decommissioning their base up there. At the time, I declined. I was concerned about moving munitions along the railway.
And now, sir?
Now I suspect it'll be safer if they were removed. I had no idea how much material was up there. Yes, I think I'll need to make a phone call tomorrow morning.
I hope this Ministry of Defence lot are careful,
Fred said, and the conversation turned to other matters. Ivo Hugh was mostly silent. That story had given him a lot to think about.